Now, there are some people in this world who find themselves so touched by something that changes, that changes their lives, that they go on to change the lives of others. Now, those who live, when those lives are young, innocent ones that have been ravaged by conflict and left with little hope, the importance of that work becomes that much more significant. And that's how our next speaker found himself creating the Palestine Children's Relief Fund in 1991. Freelance writer Steve Sosebee steered clear of the complex politics of the region to focus entirely on the needs of children who've been the victims of war. And he's here to tell us more about how it works and how it's making such a difference. So please give a warm welcome to Steve Sosebee.
I was asked, I really am not usually very comfortable speaking about myself. I don't believe those who serve the type of work that I'm doing should do it for self-promotion or really to speak too much about our personal lives. But I was asked by Tamer to come and give you my story, and hopefully there's two things that will come from that, and I was willing to do it for these two reasons. The first being that I would like to just give some exposure and more exposure to this issue in Palestine, particularly the welfare of children under occupation and even Palestinian children in the diaspora who don't get enough attention by the international media. And even in a place like Dubai, I'm always running into people who don't know really what's going on the ground in Palestine. And the second reason, hopefully I can show you what an individual who comes from relatively modest background, I certainly don't possess the level of intelligence or intellectual capabilities or physical attributes that many of our speakers here today do. So what my story will show is that those of us even from modest backgrounds are able to make a difference, even in a complex and really complicated issue like Palestine. And I don't have a great number of slides. That first slide, by the way, I'll go back here, was taken off the wall, the apartheid wall, the security wall, whatever you want to call it, in Bethlehem. There's a famous British journalist who went, or artist who went and did these really beautiful paintings, and that's one I thought would be a nice one to start off here, and it really symbolizes what many of us working on the ground in Palestine feel about the issue. That pretty much sums it up with one wall graffiti there. I was asked to tell my story, so I'm going to do it. I come from the Midwest, from the flyover country, as we call it, the Great Lakes region. I come from a town called Kent, Ohio, and it's the classic Midwest small town with parades on the 4th of July and Memorial Day. We love baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, all of those classic stereotypical American images which you see in Hollywood. And in many ways, it's partly true. And I'm from that background. I mean, it's a rural community for the most part. Brought up with those basic values that you hear about. But what also is unique about my hometown and the university I went to is we had also a very small uprising against the Vietnam War in 1970 when I was a young child. I don't remember it, but it was certainly brought up, and it was part of our community and part of our heritage, where 4 students, college students, were killed by soldiers, or by National Guard troops, soldiers, for protesting the Vietnam War, particularly the invasion of Cambodia at the end of April 1970. And that was part of my legacy growing up. And being in a small Ohio town, you would think it's very conservative, but it's also a university town. And being very young and always hearing stories and, the students, and at that time, I came to realize, and it was brought up as part of my heritage, that we are not islands in this world. We are on our spiritual quest through life. Especially as an American, I felt, and I was brought up with this feeling, that we have an obligation and a responsibility, brought up as free men in a free country, being privileged with the protection of our government for individual rights and freedom. We have an obligation and a responsibility to support those and assist those who are not born with the same rights. My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather fought against colonial rule and against oppression. And my great-great-great-grandfather fought against slavery. And my great-great-grandfather struggled for equality and civil rights in my country. And perhaps my great-grandmother or great-great-grandmother struggled for women's rights, and so on and so forth. And I also was brought up with the responsibility to support those who don't have the same rights I was born with, and which my forefathers died for and fought for and struggled for. So that's part of my legacy and my value system. So when I was brought up in this environment, what I realized, in addition to this obligation and responsibility that I believe all free men have, and women, to struggle for those who are not free, I also felt that it's a responsibility to do it in a positive, peaceful, nonviolent way. That violence begets violence, an eye for an eye leaves the world blind. All of these things which you've heard are very true. And we've seen it very clearly throughout the world, throughout human history, that this continuation of this cycle of violence, of resisting your oppressor by oppressing him and his family, doesn't lead to any type of justice. It just leads to more suffering, more orphans, more hardship. So I wanted to find a way that I could do something positive, and I was always looking for ways to understand what was going on in the world. I was very curious. I was fortunate to have parents who really stressed the need to look outside the walls that surrounded, well, us as individuals. We have to always be concerned about our brethren, whether they're the neighbor next to you or people across the other side of the sea. And I was always interested in other places. When I was a young man, we had the struggle for freedom in South Africa. And we had the struggle in Central America for liberation and freedom for peasants and for people who are not having the same rights as the ruling class. And all of my friends and colleagues at the university were very keen on these issues as well. And one issue that nobody would ever touch was the Middle East. And I always didn't understand why that was. What's the difference between the Middle East and South Africa, or the struggles in Central America for liberation? So I started to read about it, and I started to try to understand what was going on in Palestine or in Lebanon or in Israel, and what I came to understand, and I think anybody who tries to read about this issue with an open mind and with the basic values that freedom is the highest value that we should all strive for, comes to the conclusion that I came to at a very young age, which is that the Palestinians themselves, being the indigenous population of Palestine, have suffered a grave injustice and deserve to have some form of justice applied to them. Now, I'm not here to speak on political terms, and I'm not interested in that because my story isn't a political story, but I'm just giving you the root background of how I got started on this issue. It was really trying to work for justice and to understand this issue. And so what I did is, I had the opportunity, I was very active at my university, I used to bring speakers, because I understood what happened in 1948. I actually understood what happened, it started long before 1948. In 1917 with Balfour, and the uprising of 1936 to 1939, 1948, of course, being the Nakba for the Palestinians, and so on and so forth. I read about all these issues, and I understood them very well, and I could definitely speak about them and defend them if needed. And so I wanted to educate my fellow students, because I believe that, my brothers and sisters and my neighbors and my colleagues all shared, for the most part, the same values that I have. And that if they saw the same things that I saw or knew about what was going on there, they would be, if not outraged, then certainly sympathetic to this struggle, which is a struggle of justice. And so I had the opportunity, I started to bring speakers and try to educate my students, and I had the opportunity in December of 1988. It's all timing, I guess, in life. Success is timing, and failure is timing. And in my situation, when I started to really get active and interested, because one of the things that interested me about why I tried to study about Palestine was that students in universities in the West Bank were throwing stones and being shot by soldiers the same way students at my university. So I was like, well, that's, there's a connection there. So I started to understand it, and then I had the opportunity as a student to go during the first year of the first Palestinian uprising, which was December of 1988, to go with a group of other college students and just do a tour, just visit homes and villages and refugee camps and hear from people firsthand how were their lives. What were they enduring? What were they struggling to achieve? And what I found, having never been to the Middle East before, what I found was just, it was a life-changing experience for me, obviously. I met so many kind, generous, hospitable people that I never imagined would be so hospitable to strangers coming in to hear about their stories, and having endured the home demolitions, the deportations, the imprisonment without trial, their families being oppressed, killed, injured, what have you. All of these people opened their homes, opened their hearts, and treated me with such respect and kindness. I felt such a sense of guilt having leaving after 3 weeks, and feeling that all I was just a witness to this kind of this struggle, and I had an obligation. As I said before, it was a basic value. We have an obligation to at least support and tell these stories when we go back. So I finished college. I had a degree in international relations, which is not a degree you can do much with unless you go on to graduate school or you want to teach, and I wasn't interested in doing any of those things when I finished college. I wanted a little life of adventure. I went back to Palestine, and I wanted to write. I wanted to tell stories, and not stories about negotiations or stories about things you'll read if you open the New York Times today, Hillary Clinton speaking about the next round of negotiations and what have you. Those aren't things that interested me. I wanted to tell the stories that I had heard, sitting in taxis and meeting somebody whose father had been put on a helicopter in the middle of the night and dumped over on the border in Lebanon without trial, without any type of due process. Just he was a political activist, and that's how they solved that problem. I wanted to tell his story. And I wanted to tell the story about the farmer whose land was uprooted by bulldozers because a settlement was being built next door and he didn't receive any type of compensation. These are the type of stories I wanted to tell. American people needed to hear it. We were paying for it as taxpayers and as citizens, and most Americans don't know. And even today, I would say the majority of Americans don't know. And I felt, I've been there. I can go back. Let me tell the story. So I started to write this. In the mainstream media in the United States, and I'm sure Riz can speak a lot more articulately and on a more informed level than I can on this subject, it's very difficult to have an honest discussion and an honest debate on the Middle East conflict in the United States. That's just the reality. Now, I remember watching Riz on CNN International, and we got a much more balanced and fair amount of coverage and news on this issue, but CNN International isn't what most Americans watch when they watch CNN. They watch the domestic news. And it's very difficult, in my opinion, to get a very open and clear view of what's really going on there. So I wanted to go and try to be a journalist, try to be a writer. And I wrote for some magazines. Maybe some of you are aware of these publications. But unfortunately, what I found was, preaching to the choir, basically. People who read these magazines and publications already know, for the most part, what's going on there. You're very, very limited on the amount of new people you can really expose this issue to, and that's what I wanted to do. I mean, people who already knew didn't need to hear from me. There's much better writers, more talented pensmen and wordsmiths than myself who could do a much better job than I can, articulating the viewpoints of what these people already knew. So at the same time that I was writing stories and trying to do these type of personal stories, I heard about this boy, a little 10-year-old boy from the West Bank town of Hebron, who had been eating lunch with his family, and a patrol of Israeli soldiers, according to his family, had passed by, and one of the soldiers had just tossed an anti-tank grenade at them. And this was a family of about 13 kids and 2 parents, and the whole family was injured. And this boy suffered the most traumatic injuries, having lost both his legs, a hand, and one eye. He was only 10 years old. And I wanted to do a story because that was very unusual. Most of the injuries at that time in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip were bullet injuries. This is the first intifada. It was a grassroots uprising against occupation at that time. People speak, now you hear a lot of rhetoric coming out of the Middle East about this nonviolent resistance. Well, in my opinion, the first intifada was a nonviolent uprising, more or less, and compared to the second one, certainly. And this was an incident that I really wanted to write about. I went and met this boy at a hospital on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem called Maqasid, which is one of the best hospitals in Palestine. And met this child, this boy, who was just the most amazing kid I've ever met before. Expecting to meet, this bedridden, maimed child, maybe in the intensive care or something. What I found instead was this little 10-year-old boy already mastering the controls of his wheelchair, not an electric one, but going up and down the hall, chasing nurses, joking around with other young men, Shabab, in his hospital bed. And basically full of so much life and such spirit. And I really just we became friends. And here I was a 23-year-old American guy, didn't speak any Arabic at the time. And here was a 10-year-old boy from the West Bank, didn't speak any English, worlds apart, more or less. And we became friends somehow. And at that time I just felt, this boy, in 5 years I'll come and visit him. And he'll be 15. He'll still be in a wheelchair because there's no place for him to get legs in Palestine. And that spirit, that light, that fire inside of him, which is so positive and so beautiful right now, is going to be extinguished. I mean, 5 years in a wheelchair, when you're at that moment from 10 to 15 in your life, no spirit can stay that strong. I mean, it's just a matter of time before he realizes that this is what his future is. It's going to be this maimed child. He was from a very poor family in the beginning, so it really there wasn't a wealth of opportunities for him, even had he not been injured. So at that time, writing for those 2 magazines, which I showed you wasn't a way to really make a living. I was doing landscaping for half the year, and then I would go to Palestine and write for half the year, landscaping back in the States. And that's how I paid my way through college. I went back to the States, and I took a picture of this boy to go back to work and try to sustain myself. And I took his photograph and I showed it to a physician in Akron. I'm from Kent, which is in northeast Ohio. I showed a physician who was a Lebanese doctor, orthopedic surgeon. He was retiring. He had spent 30, 40 years building a career in Akron, Ohio. So many people owed him favors. You know, by the time you're 50, 60, 70 years old as a physician, all these young guys owe you favors, and you know everybody. So he made a few phone calls. And we arranged for this boy to come and get treatment. And I remember going back and picking him up in May of 1990. And I went and caught him from the West Side. I didn't know what I was doing. And I went to his home, and you know, his counter with a long line of miracles that would come over the next 20 years of this type of work. People of goodwill, of good conscience, just come out of the ether and help and make this healing process possible. And that's what happened with this boy. So we went to Jordan. He came to the States, and he started getting treatment. And this is the picture I took. This is the truck I had. It didn't even have brakes, actually. It was very dangerous. I don't know how I lived. This is the first day he came home with his new legs, having first time he'd walked again since he lost his legs 9 or 10 months before. He was so happy and so excited, and I was too, because you know it was such a long journey, and I'd never done this before. And so I just got out of the truck and said, "Let me take a picture of you," and he was so proud, you know. And the other thing that came out of this experience initially, because as I told you, I wanted to educate people to see, to know what I had seen and what I had experienced in Palestine. I think, you know, the divide between what's going on there and the reality or the images that Americans get is so wide that it wasn't enough to just bring one boy and get him treatment. It really was important that people see him. And this was the first Palestinian child ever to come to the States for medical care from the Intifada. And when he came, he was on the front pages, him and his sister. His sister came with him as well. She was injured. She had suffered 2 compound fractures of her legs and came for orthopedic surgery as well. So they were on the front page of the newspapers. They were on TV news. And it was really, it accomplished what I had tried to initially set out to do, which was to write and to educate, you know, Joe Sixpack next door about what was going on in Palestine. And this was, it really did that. And here it was on the front page of the main newspapers in Northeast Ohio. Millions of people were reading their story. And I think for the first time, a lot of people said, wow, you know, I didn't know Palestinian children, innocent civilians, were also victims in this conflict. I thought it was just terrorists. I thought it was just Israeli victims. And you know, my motivation was to help this boy. But also it's important that people see the truth so we can prevent more kids like this from getting treatment. So that really made me happy. And as when he went back home, and he went back home walking, and we raised money for his college education, and he went back home speaking English fluently, and really was a new child, was like a flower that had bloomed, him and his sister both. More people heard about his story and just came to me with so many other kids who were injured. And I wasn't thinking long term. I was thinking, well, I helped that boy, that's great. I mean, on a one-to-one basis, I really felt that I had done something decent and humane. And then, you know, people started bringing me all of these other kids. And I realized American hospitals, I mean, as screwed up as you may deem the American healthcare system to be, it's a free enterprise system. So unlike Belgium, for example, or France, or European institutions, which are run by the government and very bureaucratic and centralized, the CEO of a hospital in Des Moines, Iowa can say, yeah, I'll take a child, and that's it. I'll just bring them over and get him treatment. Whereas that can't go on in Europe. So I really thought it was a good opportunity for me to start placing these kids in American hospitals for free, getting them treatment without costing any money. And so I thought this is a good way. I mean, instead of writing and just preaching to the people who know already, or you know, feeling that I really wasn't doing anything important or relevant, I could get these kids treatment, get them the care that they need, that they weren't going to get, new lives, and that's really the most important thing. Secondly, expose, you know, people who don't know to what's going on through the media or through these kids being in their hospital or in their neighborhood. And finally, you know, there was really a thirst on the part of the Palestinian community in the States to be involved. They felt so frustrated, like we do today. How can I help out? How can I contribute to my people's plight? How can I do something positive? Because historically, and I'm not going to speak politically, but historically, the Palestinian leadership has been very, well, how shall I say, they just don't really involve the grassroots community in real active responsibilities to the struggle outside in the diaspora. They raise money historically, and there wasn't any role for people, everyday people, to play. Here we were asking the community to open their homes and host these children. take them to their appointments, help us raise money to bring them over, all of these things. And I found the response was overwhelming, that there was such a great amount of goodwill and desire on the part of the Palestinian, and even not the Palestinian community. People like myself, I'm not Palestinian at all, I have no ties, I'm just a guy from Ohio. Wanting to do something, feeling really responsible or guilty about what was going on there and not being able to do something positive. So I started this organization with a few other people after a very long, I'm not going to make a long story, but you know, having knocked on so many doors and so many doors were closed, I started a nonprofit to facilitate bringing kids over and getting them treatment in the States for free wherever I could find it. It's a big country, 300 million people, you know, so there's almost an endless amount of opportunities to get kids treated. We have a very good quality of healthcare in the States. The system might be a little bit strange, but the quality is very high, of course. And so I could find these kids treatment, whether it's in Houston or Los Angeles or Cleveland or Miami or New York, wherever. Just work and find it. But you know, the hard part at that time was that there was no internet. And I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I started with a typewriter and with a fax machine. But you know, as mass communication became easier, the work became much easier. And so I started this organization, and at the same time, I met this woman, and you see her there with my two daughters, who I fell in love with. And it was a love at first sight type of situation. You know, just like a 24-year-old American guy from Ohio meets a 10-year-old boy from Hebron, and we connect, and I help him, and you know, all of these cultural or social barriers, which you know everybody always talks about, didn't really exist. I mean, we managed, and we became great friends, and we are today. And the same thing between my wife. Here is this woman, Palestinian woman, never left Palestine, from the West Bank, and myself, an American guy, fell in love immediately. And we had a kind of a fairy tale type of courtship, because in Palestine, obviously, it's a conservative society, and you can't openly, a man and a woman can't really have a social relationship openly. And we would, the first time I'm telling this story publicly, so forgive me, my wife. We would, there's a, you know, the villages around Jerusalem, many of them were emptied by force in 1948. There's a village, and most of them were destroyed, repopulated by Israelis. But there's still a village called Lifta at the entrance of Jerusalem on the Tel Aviv Road. And that still has these empty buildings of Palestinians who used to live there. I mean, they're all empty now, but it's still existing, and it's a park now. And we would just go there, my wife and I, and just get to know each other and fall deeper in love and have, you know, really this kind of fairy tale period of our lives. And so we married during the first, I was asked to tell my story. Again, I'm telling my story. This isn't really that important other than, you know, I was asked to tell my story. So here it is. We married in Ramallah in 1993, which was still the Intifada, and at the time, when outside people were thinking, oh, there's this violence and there's this, lack of tolerance on the part of Westerners coming in. Well, my wife and I married in the West Bank. I was an American, she's Palestinian, she's Muslim, and we did not face any opposition from anyone. We had an open wedding. It was public, and never once in my life did I face any type of hostility, anger, problems from anyone in the Arab-Palestinian community for the relationship that my wife and I had. And that says a lot about the level of tolerance and acceptance that exists in the Middle East, which doesn't get often enough credit and recognition, in my opinion. So, I think these photos here, just because it shows, my wife was a social worker, and that's how we met. We met through work. So she started to build this organization with me. And from 1993 up until the second Intifada, which was in September of 2000, we really were working so hard from nothing. I mean, we started, as I told you, I crossed the bridge with the first kid without even $1 in my pocket. We started really trying to build and mobilize and organize on a grassroots level the community in the States, and also starting to branch out into places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, and so on. Building a strong grassroots network of supporters, volunteers, doctors, and so on. And we did this together as a team. My wife passed away last year from cancer. And I'm only saying that because she was not only the greatest person, the love of my life, my soulmate, but she was also one of the greatest person I ever met. And I'm not saying that because she was my wife. You know, she was diagnosed here in Dubai on Christmas Day of 2008. We were in Emirates Hospital, and there were 6 kids that we had brought over here, and they were getting tests and so on, and she wasn't feeling well, so she had a blood test, and they determined that she had leukemia, and that was the exact time that the Israeli assault on Gaza started. The day she was diagnosed, 3 days later, as we went back to the States, the invasion of Gaza started. And my wife, I'm just going to tell you a little story, which kind of summarizes her character and her spirit. All she asked about during the first month of her chemotherapy, of her disease, was what was going on, in Gaza. How are people surviving? What were we doing? What were we doing to help? Excuse me. And it's really amazing because she easily didn't allow the fear or the having two small kids, the reality of what was happening interfere with what she was as a human being. And she made me such a better person. So I can't tell my story without telling that story. So what we started to do as an organization, as a husband and wife, and then building an organization, getting employees, growing slowly on a grassroots level, we brought a lot of kids out. We brought hundreds and hundreds of kids to the States and then to Europe. And as the internet expanded and made technology so much easier to communicate, it made our work possible. And again, as I said, it's timing. If there was no internet, I wouldn't be here in front of you today because communication is the key to our work. I mean, now I send kids sometimes from Iraq or from Lebanese camps or from Palestine, kids I've never met, to hospitals and doctors I've never met. They get treatment and go back home, and I've never met any of them. I've never met the kids, and I've never met the doctors, and it's all done through communication, and that's really an achievement on the part of where we've gone, and that's a positive way to use, obviously, mass communication and the internet. But what I found is that, instead of wanting to bring in one kid outside for treatment, why not send surgery teams there to work? And so we started, I really wanted to do something more than just on an individual basis. I wanted to address the deficiencies in the healthcare system in Palestine, and there are so many. And what I found is that there's so many physicians and doctors who are willing to go and work there and volunteer their time. American doctors, European doctors, Kiwis, Aussies, Arabs with foreign passports who have, and many of them don't have any connection to Palestine. They really wanted to go and help on a humanitarian level. So we started covering their missions and their areas of work. And last year, what was last year? 2009. And that was a year I did not go to Palestine at all because I was caring for my wife. We sent over 50 missions to Palestine and to the camps in Lebanon and treated over 2,000 kids with plastic surgery, and urology, open heart surgery, orthopedics, maxillofacial surgery, eye surgery, all of these different areas where there's no specialty. There's the specialists leave, or it hasn't been developed, or it's not permitted to develop. We've been able to kind of address this area by bringing in specialists and doing really a good job in that area. And so that's our main focus now in doing missions. I just came yesterday from Palestine. We had a team in Hebron, an Italian plastic surgery team doing burns, like that child up there on the upper left-hand corner, doing those type of cases, which are very difficult to do, not only surgically, but emotionally when you see a child like that. No matter what you do for a child like that, you're never going to make him better than he was before he was injured, or even like he was before he was injured. All you can do is try to help improve his life, but we've done that. And these doctors go as volunteers. We just cover their expenses. And the main thing not only is to provide treatment and care for kids, but also to show a level of solidarity and support for the people there. Because honestly, the main thing people are looking for there under occupation, I was in Gaza 2 days ago, is some kind of sign that those outside, whether you're Arab, Palestinian, or just somebody who believes in justice, peace, and equality, they're looking for signs from us that we care, that we haven't forgotten them during this siege, during this hardship that them and their children are enduring. So I think it's important that these missions, when they go there, we go there with the spirit of solidarity and support for the Palestinian people. And these doctors are really the true heroes of this mission and of this organization. In addition to that, we still bring kids outside for treatment. And this is a little boy who was shot in the head when his mother was carrying him in the Tulkarm refugee camp in 1988. And he had suffered a plastic bullet injury to his head, which had left a gaping hole. And I was so fortunate to get him treatment in Cleveland. We continue. In addition to sending missions there's some kids that can't be treated in Palestine through our mission, so we still bring them outside, and they're still getting a lot of exposure in the media. And I think it's an important part of our work. It's not the main purpose, but it certainly is still important. And in addition to that, we do other types of humanitarian aid. I think it's, there's other areas that you have to help people that aren't in this area of surgery, for example. We do shipments of wheelchairs. Malnutrition in Gaza now. Gaza, 1.5 million people, a very small area, I think less than the size of Dubai, perhaps. They've been under siege now for a long time, not just since the January of 2000 or December of 2008, but longer than that. It's been under siege since the first Gulf War, really. And people there, the level of malnutrition in Gaza is affecting the majority of children. And Gaza itself, 1.5 million people, half of them are under the age of 15. So of those children, the vast majority of them are suffering some type of nutritional deficiency, which is a permanent disability on their growth. I mean, when a child at the age of 2 or 3 isn't getting proper nutrition, isn't growing, their head isn't expanding, their body physiologically is not going to develop, it's never going to, you can't go back later and fix that. That's a permanent effect of this occupation of the siege. So we're trying to do nutritional distributions of food to at-risk mothers with small children. We're doing distributions of wheelchairs. We see handicapped kids all the time who have no means of getting around, and their parents carry them every time they want to go from the one room to another. Their father or uncle or brother has to come and lift them, or their mother. And this is a very basic thing to provide them a wheelchair. It enables them to go to school. It alleviates the hardship on the family. So we've been doing thousands of wheelchair distributions. We do child sponsorship programs. We do all kinds of things in addition to the surgery part of our work that tries to hopefully alleviate some of the hardship that people there are enduring. The current relief projects that we're doing, and I'm kind of going from my story into what we're trying to do now, and this is the main focus of my life now, is to continue to find kids free care that they cannot get locally. This is a little boy from Gaza. I took this picture on my phone about 3 months ago. He's been living with me in Ohio. He suffered a head injury as a result of, actually was hiding in his home during the Israeli invasion in January of '09, and suffered a shrapnel injury and left 2 big holes in his head. He got treatment in Cleveland. Very brave little 9-year-old boy. Came without his family. Lived with me and my 2 daughters for a while. Now he's with another host family. And these are the type of kids. These are individual children who need that type of assistance. And they were falling through the kind of the safety net that exists in any society. I mean, I was seeing all of these kids who other NGOs or other institutions weren't helping, because this type of unique project of identifying these individual children and getting them treatment didn't exist. So I started to pick up, and that was my contribution to Palestine, and we continue today with that type of work. In addition to that, as we continue to do surgery missions, as I told you, we had a plastic surgery team in Hebron last week, and right now, yesterday, today's Saturday, yesterday, an Italian open heart surgery team arrived in Jerusalem, 6 of them. They're going to start doing babies with heart disease. We do other type of training of medical personnel. That's the most important thing, isn't it? I mean, we can come and do surgery and leave, and we have maybe 20 kids better than before. But if you don't teach the local doctors how to work, you don't teach the local nurses and give them experience, you're not doing your job. And that's an important part of our work, as well as the training aspect of trying to get people to treat their own kids. And hopefully one day there will be no need for PCRF or for myself, that all of the doctors and the institutions there will be able to provide adequate care for their own patients without having foreigners come in, even with a high level of solidarity, and even learning from the locals as well, which of course we do. There's no need for us to come. Everything can be done locally. That's our dream, and that's our objective, and that's our goal. And right now, we're trying to upgrade the quality of infrastructure in the healthcare system. And we're taking on a very specialized area. We built the first and only pediatric cardiac surgery program. When I first started, I just kept seeing so many kids born with holes in their hearts who were dying. And the Palestinian institutions didn't have the ability to provide these kids the life-saving care that they needed. They weren't victims of Israeli bullets or bombs, so there wasn't this high level of nationalist desire to help these kids. But they were human beings and children, and for me, I don't differentiate. And this is even why we've taken on the issue of Iraqi kids as well. I don't care if a child is Christian or Muslim, Palestinian, Iraqi, Shiite, or Sunni. A child is a child, obviously. This is such a cliche, but it's true. We help any kid that comes to our attention in the Middle East to get the care that they need. Now, obviously, in Iraq, it's a little bit difficult because of the security situation there, but we help those kids whenever we can. And building infrastructure is what we're trying to do now. And we've taken on the pediatric cardiac surgery program. We've done 200 operations each of the last 3 years of kids with heart disease, saving 200 lives, and we've already done over 100 this year, which is really a good achievement. We're starting to build the first and only pediatric oncology program in Palestine, which is right now kids with cancer. And this isn't just something because it affected my family and affected me, but kids with a cancer in Palestine are not getting adequate care. In fact, they don't get almost any care at all. And even those in the Gaza Strip, and there's I think that 20 or 30 kids a year born with cancer, or not born with, but acquiring cancer in the Gaza Strip, are not able to have access to adequate care, whether it's in Jerusalem or in the King Hussein Center in Jordan, an excellent facility. So we really have to build up in organic Palestinian medical facilities locally. We don't want to send them to Europe or North America or to Israel or to Jordan. We want Palestinian institutions to treat their own kids at a high level of care, so these kids don't have to travel across borders or through checkpoints to get treatment that they otherwise should get in any normal environment. And that's what we're trying to do with the cancer program, with the cleft lip and cleft palate program, with all of these different programs that we're doing. We're really trying to develop Palestinian institutions to provide the care that they need. And then this is, again, all these kids get the media exposure, and it's a positive thing, because I can't tell you how much I think the impression of Americans from when I first started, as you saw that first story of that first boy from Hebron who lost his legs, up until this story a couple of months ago, there's just been a significant change. I think the vast majority of Americans really know what's going on in Palestine. And while that hasn't provided a change in our government's policy in the region that much, it's a little bit better now than it was a few years ago. But I think the majority of Americans know that the Palestinians have rights. They are a nation. They were wrong. They deserve support. And maybe they don't agree completely with this viewpoint, or there's different levels of that type of solidarity, but I think the majority of American people are starting to realize that. And I don't want to say I had anything to do with it, because I didn't, but it's just a very positive development in the last 20 years. And I think, not only are we providing life-saving aid, but we're building bridges. As I said, our doctors come with a high level of solidarity and support for the cause on a human level. And it's a cause of peace and justice. Look, this isn't my initial motivation for this cause. Might be because I believe in justice and I believe in freedom, and I think it's a responsibility and an obligation of everybody born into my privileged background as a free white man in America to work for justice for others who don't have that right, particularly those who are being denied justice in areas where my government is supporting that injustice. I'm sorry to say that. I'm not trying to get political, but this is reality. We have an obligation and a responsibility to work. And it's not enough to be frustrated at what's going on over there. It's not enough to be angry about what's going on over there. Life is a spiritual journey. We're not islands. We have to work and support our brethren in a positive, peaceful, healing way. I think love is the strongest emotion. It's so much stronger than hate. Hate is more destructive, but love is more powerful. And my work is based on the idea of love. I wasn't raised a hippie, but I believe in that kind of concept of love, and that's where I put my work. And I think activists, the generations before me that worked for social justice in the States, whether it was civil rights or unionizing or things like that, they had different methods and different ways of working. But I share their same level of, the same belief in justice for people everywhere. I've just applied that value system to Palestine, and this is what the result was. So this is the last picture. It's another piece of graffiti you'll see in Bethlehem if you go there. I encourage anybody who wants to have a life-changing experience in a positive way, visit Palestine.